Hey, I think we can start. Welcome to our webinar on understanding more EV and other stackable electric car incentives. I'll introduce myself before passing it to Anna. My name is Caroline. I'm an electric vehicle program associate on the Drive Green team at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and I'll be helping to lead today's webinar. I'll pass it on to Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna. I'm our electric vehicle program director, and I am here as the support team today. So welcome.
Hey, as we get started, I'll give a little bit of context about who we are. So we're Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization based in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We've been around since 1982. We have a mission to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. There's some different clean energy and fuel, clean energy and efficiency programs through across the organization, but I'm speaking today from the Drive Green team. There's also advocacy. The Drive Green team started in 2016. It started with mission to educate consumers about the benefits of electric vehicles, and it started to provide a platform through which consumers could buy EVs. So in early days, the team worked closely with dealerships. The pandemic happened, and consumer buying habits shifted, and so over time, we've come to focus on outreach and events, and we work with community partners. Sometimes we host ride and drives. So if you are interested in test driving an electric vehicle, if you're located in Western Mass, we have a couple of ride and drives coming up in the next month or two. So we'll talk about that at the end. So before we get into more EV and the other rebates, I will mention that the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources facilitates statewide energy programs, and the Center for Sustainable Energy is a national nonprofit with a mission of accelerating the adoption of clean transportation. So the Center for Sustainable Energy administers the More EV program. So More EV is a statewide rebate program for electric battery vehicles or fuel cell electric vehicles in the state of Massachusetts. There are different rebates that More EV offers. There's a $3,500 standard rebate, a $3,500 used rebate, an income qualifying rebate of $1,500 called More EV Plus. There's a trade-in rebate for $1,000. And then there is a rebate for electric pickup trucks and other Class 2 vehicles for $7,500. A few of the rebates can be received at the point of sale, including More EV Standard, Used, and More EV Plus. In today's presentation, I'll start with an EV 101. We'll go over different types of EVs. We'll define them, look at pictures. We'll get into charging a little bit, and then we'll do a deep dive into more EV and the different rebates and the application process and how to obtain them. We'll do an overview of the federal tax credit, and we'll leave time at the end for a Q&A. And we'll get into EV 101. So we'll start with a battery electric vehicle. All electric vehicles have a battery with different mineral components. All have lithium ion. This is battery powered. Modern EVs have a range of anywhere from 60 to 100, they're 350 or more miles. Generally, we're seeing cars on the road with like a median 300-mile range. We'll get into that a little bit later. We have a slide that showcases median range. It can be hooked up to a level 1, level 2, or a DC fast charger. Some examples are a Chevy Equinox, the Hyundai Ioniq series, the Ford Mach-E, all Teslas. And battery electric vehicles require limited maintenance. If you switch, you'll never need an oil change again. And lastly, one other thing I'll mention is that battery electric vehicles produce zero tailpipe emissions because they don't have a tailpipe. Then we'll move on to plug-in hybrids. Plug-in hybrids are powered by both gas and electricity. These vehicles have a small battery. Their total mile range goes anywhere from 150 to 570 miles, depending on the make and model. If it's more recent, it'll be higher. And they'll have an electric range of anywhere from 25 to 53 miles. These vehicles can be charged on level one or level two um, at home generally. Examples include the Toyota Prius Prime, the RAV4 Prime, the Chrysler Pacifica, the Honda Clarita plug-in hybrid. One other thing I'll mention, unfortunately, plug-in hybrids do not qualify for the More EV rebate, but they do qualify for the federal tax credit. Hence why we're talking about them today. And what's great about the electric range is that the 30 to 50 mile electric range generally is very suitable for the majority of lifestyles and driving habits. Most people tend to drive 40 miles or less within a day. And if that describes you, if you were driving a plug-in hybrid, you could drive entirely on electric, generally speaking. So it's great and pretty suitable as well. And I'll also talk about fuel cell electric vehicles. These are powered by hydrogen. So, in lieu of going to a charging station or plugging in at home, if you drive a fuel cell EV, you would go to a hydrogen refueling station and you'd refuel your hydrogen tank. Total range is similar to that of battery electric vehicles, ranging from 250 to 320 mile in total range. That refueling process is similar to filling a gas tank. It's short and takes 3 to 5 minutes. Fuel cell EVs do qualify under More EV and the federal tax credit. There are not many fuel cell EVs in New England. There aren't many hydrogen refueling stations in the region. The majority of these types of vehicles are on the road in California. If you've ever heard of Toyota Mirai, Hyundai Nexo, those are some types of fuel cell EVs. We can move to the next slide. Um, and some like big picture benefits of driving electric are that EVs reduce or eliminate tailpipe emissions and increasingly use more environmentally friendly energy sources. Could be from solar, another renewable energy source, or from a cleaner electric grid. Help to reduce air pollution. In Massachusetts, 95% of air pollution comes from the combustion of fossil fuels. So when cleaner cars on the road and fewer emissions from tailpipes per se, from lack thereof, this contributes to cleaner air, cleaner communities, and improvement in public health as well. Okay, in this slide, I'm going to talk about fuel costs. And this is relevant because we want to determine that it is cheaper to drive a mile on electricity than it is on gas, because EVs are so efficient. So we make several assumptions to do this and to prove this hypothesis per se. So on average, we know that EVs use 0.3 kilowatt hours of energy per mile. And the average fuel efficiency of a gas car in 2025 is 28 miles per gallon. And the average price of gas is $3.02 in New England, at least. And that is of last week. We can look at the big utilities in Massachusetts, National Grid or Eversource. And to calculate the cost of electricity, we would multiply the total cost per kilowatt hour by the assumed efficiency of EVs per mile. So I'll go through the process for the first utility, National Grid. So for National Grid, this would be the price per kilowatt hour, 33 cents, times the assumed efficiency of EVs, 0.3 kilowatt hours, and then the resulting cost to drive per mile electricity is 10 cents. We would repeat the process for Eversource in doing our math. And then our next step is to calculate the cost to drive per mile on gas. Um, so we would divide the average gas price, $3.02, by the assumed fuel efficiency of gas cars, so 28 miles per gallon. And we can find that the gas car drivers pay 11 cents per mile on gas. And then to reach our saving, right, we subtract that from the cost per mile on electricity. And we find that generally those that drive an EV save a couple to a few cents per mile on electricity. Your utility prices change every 6 months for basic service. So we do review this math quarterly because the utility in Rhode Island runs on a different cycle. So we will link our math, and when we hand out the recording and the slides, if you are interested and you're in really how we came up with these answers, happy to provide those resources. And if in a couple of months in the summer, your utility price changes, we're here to provide that math. Um, One other thing I will mention is that an increasing number in cities and towns have municipal aggregation programs. So it is possible you might be paying a different rate per kilowatt hour. I would recommend checking with your electricity bill if that is the case. We can move on to the next slide, I believe. So here we'll talk about vehicle range and efficiency. Efficiency refers to the concept of really how much energy is being used to complete a task. So the higher the efficiency, the less waste a vehicle would produce, and the more energy you get out of it. And you can generally see that uh, the ranges for electric vehicles are tend to be higher than that for gas vehicles. And when we look at miles per gallon as well, and miles per gallon equivalent, you can see that gas vehicles can not go as far on a single full gallon as an EV can go on a full charge. When we talk about range, uh, total range generally takes into account efficiency, fuel economy, and battery size of an EV as well. And we'll move on to maintenance costs. So this graph is from the U.S. Department of Energy, and it shows scheduled light duty vehicle maintenance costs on a per mile basis. So on the left, we have gas vehicles. To the right of them, we have traditional hybrids. Then we have plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles. You can see a 4-cent difference in total of scheduled maintenance costs on a per mile basis compared to a gas car, that of a battery electric vehicle. You could save 4 cents, which adds up. You might see that orange category of costs on the right doesn't exist for battery electric vehicles. In general, there's less wear and tear on an electric vehicle than there is on a gas car, so you're paying for maintenance much less frequently. For example, we'll look at brake wear. If you're driving an EV, there's a process called regenerative braking, which protects against some of that brake wear. And what this process entails really is if you think about like emerging to step on the brake, if you're rolling to a stop or at a stop sign, that energy from that action is taken to the battery and helps to enhance your range. That's just one of the processes in place that contributes to less wear and tear. So you're replacing your brake pads much less frequently. And there's the lack of a tailpipe as well, which of course, like we talked about, is related to less emissions, but that also refers to and connects to like fewer maintenance costs as well. Okay, we'll move on to charging, and we'll talk about the different types of charging in the next few slides. So level one is the slowest method of charging, but it's suitable for drivers who drive anywhere from 30 to 40 miles a day. A charging cable will generally come with the vehicle and then plug into a standard 120 volt outlet. And I know that's in this room. I'm sure you have it on the wall in your home. Um, like I said, it's the slowest method of charging. So your vehicle will reach anywhere from 3.5 to 6.5 miles of charge per hour. This is generally just found at home. And yeah, it's very easy and practical because the cable comes with your vehicle. It works well for charging at home or anywhere where the standard outlet is available if you have the time to charge. We'll move on to level two. Level two is considerably faster. These can be found at home, at the workplace, and at public charging stations. Public charging stations at home, not at home, sorry, at your workplace, I mean. So these are pretty accessible if you're charging at home and overnight. Installation generally entails hiring an electrician to install that other outlet. That's a 240 volt outlet. These power heavier duty appliances like your washing machine. You may have one in your home. So that installation process is pretty straightforward, and we have some resources to help with that whole process. Its general charging range is generally 14 to 35 miles an hour, depending on your vehicle. So very practical if you're at work and you have a charging station in the parking lot and you wanted to plug in for some of the workday. That's a great time to, so very practical as well. DC fast charging is also called supercharging or level three. It's the quickest type to charge. It's only found at public charging stations and it's not installed at home because it takes a lot of power. So that's unlike level one and level two, whereas level two can be installed at home and is located at public charging stations. DC is only at public charging stations. It's very fast. So your vehicle could reach anywhere from 10 to 80% of charge in as little as 30 minutes. This can translate to 100 miles. Only battery electric vehicles can be hooked up to DC fast charging, whereas battery electric or a plug-in hybrid could be plugged into level two. And yeah, it's very quick. Move on to the next slide. And you might ask the question, like, where is charging near me? Reality is, in New England, our charging infrastructure is quite good and it is improving. There are tools like the tool shown on this slide called PlugShare and a Better Route Planner. These are mapping tools. PlugShare in itself is open source, and what that means is you can see all of these charging icons on the screen. It helps you to pinpoint where charging is located near you. So green refers to level two and orange refers to DC. So like I said, there's DC and level two options for public charging stations. These are just two snippets from Western Mass and Eastern Mass, but I encourage you to plug in your location or your workplace and take a look at where charging is near you. One thing about a Better Route Planner is that that's generally recommended for longer trips. It's a great mapping tool. PlugShare, like I mentioned, it's open source. So what's great about that is people can update in real time if a charger needs maintenance or if it's occupied. It's a great way to filter your charging options. Say you want a particular amenity close by, or you want to charge near the park, you're able to input all of that information with these sources. We'll move on to More EV and we'll start our deep dive. And like I mentioned before, there's a subset of rebates that are available under More EV. So that's More EV Standard for $3,500. Same amount for More EV Used, $3,500. If you're income qualifying, you can add a $1,500 amount of More EV Plus. And there's more EV trade-in. So these are all stackable. If you qualify for either more EV Plus or more EV trade-in, that's $1,000. And if you're looking for a truck, that's a $7,500 rebate. There are higher rebate amounts for heavier duty pickup trucks, but for the purpose of this webinar and for time, we'll only talk about this particular $7,500 rebate for trucks. And yeah, we'll get into the application processes for all of these different rebates. Like I mentioned, some of these are available at the point of sale. All of them are available post-purchase. So More EV Standard, More EV Used, and More EV Plus are all available at the point of sale if you choose, if you opt in for that. The last two, so more e the more EV trucks, those subsets of rebates are only to be received after purchasing the vehicle. Okay, so for more EV standard, in terms of requirements, you need to be a Massachusetts resident. Could also be a business or a nonprofit that is licensed and located in Massachusetts. In terms of vehicle eligibility, More EV website has a really great vehicle search tool where you can plug in the name and then you can see if that vehicle qualifies for the particular rebate. It's got to be new battery electric or fuel cell EV, and the total MSRP has to be $55,000 or less, and it must be on the eligible vehicle list. When we say MSRP, that refers to the recommended price from the manufacturer and relaying that to the dealer, if that makes sense. So program eligibility really just means that if you're in terms of if you're leasing, that is an option for this program, but that lease term has to be at least 36 months or 3 years to be eligible for this program. We'll move on to More EV Used. So there are some different requirements. You still have to be a Massachusetts resident. You have to be participating in an improved income qualifying program and have an adjusted gross income not exceeding a few limits. So if you're an individual filer, that's $75,000. If you are a head of household, that's $112,500. That's $150,000 if you're married as well. If you do choose to receive this post-purchase, say you're not participating in a specific income qualifying program like SNAP or Mass Save, your tax information can serve as an exception depending on your specific situation. There's a pre-qualification voucher, which sort of gets into that, which we'll describe in a couple of slides. In terms of vehicle eligibility, it's a used rebate, so the vehicle must be used. It's battery electric or fuel cell. The model year has to be at least 2 years earlier than the calendar year it was purchased or leased in. There is a purchase price limit of $40,000 or less, so slightly lower than More EV Standard. And the vehicle in question cannot have received this rebate within the last 3 years or 36 months. Leasing is an option for More EV Used. And that term limit is the same for More EV Standard, so 36 months. And all applicants must be pre-approved to receive the rebate at the point of sale, and we'll get into what that pre-qualification process looks like. And when we talk about More EV Plus, More EV Plus is also income qualifying. And some of those programs are Mass Save or LIHEAP or SNAP. And applicants must be pre-approved again to receive that rebate at the point of sale. This is a bigger list of some of those income qualifying programs. So we see Mass Save is on this list, LIHEAP, There is a full list, and there's a longer list on the website. So if you're looking for a particular program that's not on the slide, we're happy to share the link when we send out the slides if you wanted to see the full list. Okay, we'll get into the eligibility requirements for more EV trucks as well. Before we get into the specific pre-qualification vouchers that I mentioned. So private entities like businesses, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions as well, that are all licensed and located in Massachusetts are eligible. Local and state governments are also eligible to receive this rebate. If you're a business, you might be looking to electrify your fleet. This might be a pathway you pursue. Um, in terms of vehicle eligibility, the particular truck needs to be new and have a gross vehicle weight rating that is between 6,000 and 10,000 pounds. Um, and then there's another requirement that a pickup truck of any body type may have a specific gross vehicle weight rating of 8,500 to 10,000 pounds. That total MSRP limit is $80,000. When we are talking about this particular More EV Trucks rebate, we can picture heavier duty pickup trucks or utility vans that would be receiving this rebate. Um, and in terms of program requirements, the recipient or entity must retain ownership of this vehicle and maintain an active registration with the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Massachusetts for a minimum of 36 consecutive months or 3 years. And that lease term is the same amount of time, so 36 months. And individual applicants, so if you're not an entity, if you're applying as an individual person, you may also be eligible for More EV Plus, which is that income qualifying rebate. Like I mentioned before, there are higher incentives for heavier vehicles that are located on the More EV website. And then there is more EV trade-in. To be eligible, you must be a Massachusetts resident. You must qualify. You must be trading in, sorry, in a qualifying gas vehicle at the same time as purchase or lease of the eligible electric vehicle. So, in terms of vehicle eligibility, it must be 12 years old. It must have market value. You must prove that it has market value. It needs to have a specific gross vehicle weight rating of 8,500 pounds or less. It must be traded in at a licensed Massachusetts dealership. And it must have been registered in the state to either you, the applicant, or your immediate family for at least 2 years prior to the date that you're trading it in. And it must have a valid vehicle inspection report as well. Um, I think in terms of program requirements, you can apply online. You have a period of 90 days to submit your documentation on the portal after purchasing or leasing. Um, and um, if you can also receive this retroactively if you have already received a More EV rebate at the point of sale. So you still do have that 90-day period to plug in your information and documents onto the portal. Okay, we'll talk about the pre-qualification process for More EV and More EV Plus in specific. The website is user-friendly, and there is a login button where you can create an account and you can apply for the rebate right on the website. Okay, in terms of pre-qualification for More EV Plus, you need to apply for a voucher before purchasing or leasing. You must indicate which income qualifying program you participate in. You must upload a copy of your Massachusetts driver's license and documentation confirming that you participate in the income qualifying program. And you can combine or stack this rebate, so more EV plus, with either more EV used or more EV standard. In terms of more EV used, only individuals can apply for this pre-qualification voucher, and that must be done before purchasing or leasing. Um, and so, based on your income and tax filing status, you may still qualify for more EV use, and this is generally confirmed during this pre-qualification process because you would be uploading a copy of your tax transcript as well as your Massachusetts state driver's license, and this would confirm your eligibility, and then you would receive the voucher if you are eligible. And we'll move on to the federal clean vehicle tax credit as well. Okay. So of course, the material around the for federal tax credit is subject to change. Some of the requirements changed at the end of 2024, stepping into 2025. Because we are a nonprofit, um, neither us nor the Center for Sustainable Energy nor the Department of Energy Resources can provide specific tax advice that is unique to personal situations, and we recommend consulting a tax professional for specific and tailored information. And so to get into the federal clean vehicle tax credit, so that is up to $7,500 on eligible models that meet certain battery and assembly requirements. This is valid through 2032, and this is for battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and fuel cell EVs. These can be claimed at point of sale or on filing taxes. You must purchase from an IRS registered dealership. Unfortunately, there is not a standardized list of IRS registered dealerships. So the way to confirm that is by talking to the dealership directly. There are income requirements for this clean vehicle tax credit. These requirements tend to be a little bit higher than the limitations on more EV use. And that is $150,000 for individual filers, $225,000 for heads of household, and then if you are a joint household, that is a $300,000 income limit. Okay. In terms of new vehicle requirements, some of these requirements changed at the start of the new year. So your final assembly location must be in North America. That MSRP price cap, so the MSRP refers to, again, the price recommended by the car manufacturer as the selling price to the new vehicle, for the new vehicle. And that's the price recommended to the dealer. And so that price cap is $80,000 for SUVs, vans, and pickup trucks, and then a lower $55,000 for sedans and hatchbacks. There are two sets of minery and battery component requirements as well. And I believe on the next slide, we'll get into, yes, the $7,500 can be split up. So say the vehicle in question meets one of the set of mineral requirements, but not the battery requirement. Sorry, if your vehicle, say, meets the assembly location requirement and the battery and mineral requirements, then you could receive the full $7,500. If the vehicle met only one of the requirements, being assembly location or the battery and mineral requirements, then that $7,500 would be split and you could receive $3,750. So there's a little bit of leeway there. And if neither of those requirements are met, then the vehicle in question would not be eligible for the federal clean vehicle tax credit. Leasing is an option. So the Inflation Reduction Act had created a commercial vehicle tax credit, and some of those eligibility requirements are not the same. Mainly that mineral and finally assembly location requirement. For the commercial vehicle tax credit. So dealerships can actually claim this commercial vehicle tax credit, and this allows leasing to happen. And essentially, if you are looking to lease, you can pass the federal vehicle tax credit because it counts as a commercial vehicle tax credit in this circumstance. You can pass that credit on to the dealer. And then the dealer passes that on to you via discount or money off the price of the vehicle. Um, so if you're looking at a vehicle that may not meet the battery requirement for 2025, leasing might be an option. At the end of last year, there were some good leasing deals on the market. So that's definitely an option that we recommend. Used vehicles, there is a tax credit for that. The battery requirements do not apply in the specific used vehicle rebate. And so that amount is $4,000 or 30% of the sales price, whichever of those two amounts is lower. You must buy the vehicle from a dealership. It must at least be 2 years old and cost less than $25,000. And there is a lower income threshold for the used vehicle credit. And then in terms of claiming the credit, you may choose to transfer the tax credit liability, and that is essentially receiving the credit at the point of sale. Um, and or you may take the credit when filing taxes at tax time. Um, Essentially, if you are transferring the credit, you can receive those as savings towards the down payment of the vehicle, or you can apply that as credit towards the cost of the EV. And if you take it at the time of sale, you're able to access the rebate regardless of your tax liability. And this is for the case for both new and used battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. And if you are choosing to go with receiving the rebate at tax time, do know you can only claim up to your federal tax liability. Um, so if you are looking to claim the credit, there are a couple of steps. Of course, you need to confirm that your expected income is under the required limit so that you meet that income limitation. You need to make sure that the dealership or store you're working with is an IRS registered dealership and has registered with the IRS is Energy Credits online portal. You can do this by speaking to them directly, speaking to the salesperson or the general manager. And you'd want the salesperson to confirm via that online portal that the vehicle you're considering qualifies for the federal tax credit. And then after purchase, you must receive a time of sale report submitted by the dealer and a copy of the confirmation from the IRS of successful submission. So the dealer does have a period of 3 days if you are looking to receive it at limit tax time to input your information onto the portal. So it is really important that they follow through. So it's important to know about these steps, both from the consumer perspective and from the dealer perspective. If you are looking to receive it at tax time, you can file Form 8936. We have that linked on our Drive Green webpage under the federal vehicle tax credit section. If you want a direct link to that. Um, and you would have to do this generally even if you don't file taxes or if you receive the incentive at the point of sale. So this form is obligatory, and we have that linked on our Drive Green webpage as well. We have an EV Finder tool as well. We had a shopping tool in the past, but we recently revamped it. So if you're curious about different EVs and you want to compare the different offerings that are out there, we recommend this. You can filter by different criteria like range, charging speeds at level 2, and DC fast charging. And you can also sort by criteria like lowest total price. And if you select a vehicle or a particular trim, and if you choose to input your information, the Drive Green team looks to get back to you with information and updates on that particular vehicle and when and where it's available in the area near you. So when we hand out the slides and the recording, we'll provide a link, direct link to this EV Finder as well. We'll look at a couple of real world examples. We've talked a lot about the different rebates. But a big point of this webinar is to show that these can be stacked and combined to add up to like a higher savings. So we'll look at two examples. We're first look at the Nissan Ariya, which has been out for a couple of years. And generally has a range of 216 to 304 miles, depending on the year and trim. According to Kelley Blue Book, the price range for a used Nissan Ariya ranges from $20,679 to $24,611. According to Kelley Blue Book as well, there are 6 used models for sale within 20 miles of Boston. This was as of yesterday, so there could be a smaller amount today. But we'll look at a particular example, a particular offering, and how those rebates add up in the next slide. Okay, so there was one offering that was a 2023 Nissan Ariya with a total of 6,841 miles already on it. The price was $27,892 according on Kelley Blue Book. This was a real offering from a dealership located in Massachusetts. It qualified for the federal tax credit, and that's $4,000 for a used vehicle, and qualifies for more EV used. So that's another $3,500 that we can subtract from that sales price. So then we get to $20,392. But there's also more EV Plus and more EV trade-in. And then you may or may not qualify for more EV Plus, but if you do, that's an additional $1,500 that you can subtract from that price. And if you have a gas car that you no longer use, that qualifies. That's an additional $1,000 off the sales price if you trade in. So if you qualify and choose to opt for both, the final sales price in this particular situation would be $17,892. So that's, a $10,000 savings money off towards that first sales price. And then we'll look at one other example. Look at a Hyundai Kona, and this model has been around for a few years as well. So the price range for the recent model is 258 miles, and that range in terms of price varies from $18,099 to $21,898, according to Kelley Blue Book. And as of yesterday, there were 7 used models for sale within 20 miles of Boston. So this is one of the offerings. There was a 2022 Hyundai Kona with 22,580 miles on board already. The price that it was for sale at is $16,900. This model qualifies for the used vehicle tax credit and more EV used, so that's $4,000 and then $3,500. That could be subtracted from that sales price, and that leaves us with $9,400. But then again, if we qualify for more EV Plus, that's $1,500 off. And if we have an old gas car that we no longer use and qualifies, that's $1,000 off. So in this circumstance, if you qualified and opted for more EV Plus and more EV trade-in, you could potentially pay $6,900 for a used Hyundai Kona. And these are just 2 examples, but Kelley Blue Book is a great resource. Yeah, I recommend taking a look and applying some of these rebates that we've talked about because a used EV can be really affordable, relatively speaking, when we're talking about vehicles. We welcome you to join us at one of some of the upcoming events that we'll be at. We will be at Corey Lunar New Year Festival this Sunday. I believe there will be an EV scavenger hunt. So recommend heading to that. And if you're looking to test drive an EV and you're located in Western Mass or want to make that drive, we'll be at the Pittsfield Public Library on Saturday, February 22nd. And we'll have some EVs there with some local dealers, and you're welcome to test drive. And we have an event coming up in Springfield as well in March. Our information will be on our website. Yeah, so we'd love to see you. And I think we'll transition to a Q&A if anyone has any questions. We do have a survey, and this, I think Anna, if you want to talk about that.
Hi, everybody. So this is a survey put together by the Center for Sustainable Energy, which administers the More EV rebate program. So this is just them, excuse me, looking to get some feedback on EVs and your understanding of the More EV program and things like that. If you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box, which you should see on your Zoom screen. I don't see any so far, but one thing I will say is that we are getting a lot of questions about the federal tax credit and the status of that. What we can say is that the new federal administration has made it very clear that they would like to get rid of that federal tax credit, but because it was brought into being by an act of Congress in the Inflation Reduction Act, they can't just unilaterally get rid of it. They would need to pass a new law or change how they are implementing the regulation to weaken it. And so far, neither of those steps have been taken. So if you go to the IRS website, you can see that there's a list of vehicles that are eligible this year. We don't know how or when that might change, but that is the current status, according to the IRS and the Department of Energy's website. So I wanted to just head off that question. But I don't see any more in the chat. So Caroline, I think we can just go ahead. But participants, if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat.
Well, we can leave a minute or two left in case you want to ask a question. But if you don't have a question now, but have a question tomorrow, we invite you to email us. Both mine and Anna's email are on the slide, just our names, and then at greenenergyconsumers.org. We're happy to answer any questions about EVs, charging rebates that the utilities offer, our fuel cost page, and general More EV program questions. If you have a specific question about the More EV program, we also recommend reaching out to More EV staff. Yeah, I don't see any questions, Anna. Yeah, we will encourage you to stay in touch with us. Um, uh, when we send out these slides, I'll send out a link to our newsletter as well as our Drive Green Facebook group. If you have questions about EVs or already drive an EV, yeah, we recommend you to stay in touch. And we'll be in touch soon with the webinar recording. Since we don't have any questions, I think we can say goodbye. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll send the recording out soon. Yeah, thank you. I talk to you soon.
Welcome, everybody. This is a webinar put on by Green Energy Consumers Alliance. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and our mission is all about empowering consumers and communities to a just transition to a zero carbon world. And what that means is we have lots of different programs and services that people can tap into to make the switch to clean energy technologies. Today, we're going to talk about electric vehicles, but we also have programs on wind and solar and heat pumps and lots of other things. And we also do public policy advocacy work at the state level in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island to make sure that we've got programs on the books and policies on the books that will help us meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. My name is Anna Vanderspek. I'm our electric vehicle program director, and I'll be doing some of today's presentation, but I'm joined by two other colleagues as well that I'll let introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Caroline. I'll be taking some of the presentation as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Caitlin. I'm the Drive Green intern, and I will be in the Q&A section answering your questions to the best of my ability.
So today we're going to cover a bunch of things. We're going to cover how charging works in general. We're going to cover the different levels of charging. So what is level 1 versus level 2? How do you install a charging unit at home? How do you find charging on the go? And we're going to spend some time specifically on DC fast charging as well, the super fast charging that you use on road trips. As Caitlin mentioned, we absolutely welcome your questions. So throughout the webinar, if you have any, please go ahead to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and in the Q&A box, you can write in your questions and we'll answer them at the end. And similarly, if you would like closed captioning, you should see a CC box. And if you click on that, you'll see text appear at the bottom of your screen in real time as we speak. So with that, I will go ahead and move forward. So the first section we're going to talk about or go through today is how charging works. And this first slide is maybe a little intimidating, but it's important to just get a couple of key words down before we go through the rest of the presentation. I'm not an electrical engineer. This is not going to be a physics lesson, but there are some key terms that come into play a lot. So we're going to go through some key terms and what they mean. And I think that the most useful way to go through these terms is to think of electricity like water going through a pipe to fill up a bathtub. And so we'll use that metaphor throughout. So the first term that we see here is voltage. And voltage is determined by the power source and is measured in volts. So this is basically, if you think back to high school physics class, this is the potential energy. And in the metaphor about a pipe, it's the pipe size. Most household outlets are 120 volts. You'll see higher level voltage outlets for higher energy appliances or high power appliances like all electric dryers or heaters. And washing machines tend to use a 240 volt outlet, and so do level 2 charging stations, which we'll talk about later. But the key thing to remember for now is voltage determined by the power source, measured in volts, and it's the potential energy. Current is the next term here, and that is drawn by the electrical device, limited to a safe level by circuit breakers. That's what circuit breakers are for, and it's measured in amps. And that you can think of as the current or the speed, basically, of the electricity or the water running through the pipe. The voltage and current together determine the power. And if you're going to remember one of these basics of electricity from the presentation today, power is the one to remember when it comes to charging. It is basically the amount of energy delivered in a given amount of time, and it's measured in kilowatts. So if you think of a water pipe, you've got a combination of the speed of the water flow and the size of the pipe will determine the power or the flow of that water. And if you want to simplify it back to a pipe and a bathtub, it's the combination of that speed or current and the size that will determine how quickly you can fill up a bathtub. And to use the same metaphor with electric vehicles, it's the power of the charging that will determine how quickly you can fill up an EV battery. So power is when we come to talking about charging, we're going to talk a lot about kilowatts and power. The bigger the kilowatt number, the faster that vehicle can charge. But there's also the question of how big is the battery or how big is the bathtub? And that is when we're talking about that, we're talking about energy. Energy is the total capacity to do work, in this case, move a vehicle, and that is measured in kilowatt hours. So when we're talking about EVs, you hear a lot of kW or kWh. Kilowatt hours is the capacity to do work. It's how much energy you can stuff into that battery. Basically, it's the size of the bathtub. And then power is how quickly you can fill that battery or fill that bathtub. So when we talk about charging, you're going to see kilowatts a lot, either as a measure of power of an EV charging unit or a measure of how quickly any particular vehicle model can take in electricity. And we'll talk about all of that in more detail. But basically, the through line or the takeaways from this slide are power, it's chargers, kilowatts, kilowatt hours is batteries, and energy. So I'm going to start with this little graphic on the right to explain this a little bit more, and then we'll answer some key questions about what determines how fast you can charge and how far you can go. So a lot of times when people say electric vehicle charger, what they're referring to is the thing that you plug your car into. The technical term for this is EVSE, which stands for Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment. But basically what it is equipment that takes energy from the grid, from a plug in your home or somewhere out in public, and transfers it into the vehicle. And basically, EVSE is safety equipment. There's basically a little circuit breaker inside that charging station. It's just making sure that the vehicle is communicating with the grid and drawing electricity at the appropriate power level. What is actually technically considered a charger is built into the vehicle. And so in this little graphic, you see an onboard charger. What that exists to do is to take the electricity that's coming from an electrical power source. If we're talking about level 1 or level 2, it's coming in AC, alternating current, and it basically transforms it into DC, direct current, to put into the battery. So when you're talking just to an EV driver or sort of casually, you say charger, you're talking about EVSE, but there's actually an onboard charger that's doing that translation basically from AC to DC. So with that as context, a lot of questions we get from people are, how far can I go on my electric vehicle? And that depends on a couple different factors. The first is kind of naturally the size of the battery, or in this, to go back to the metaphor, the size of the bathtub. How many units of energy, how many kilowatt hours of electricity can you store in that vehicle? So on our EV Finder tool, we tell you what the kilowatt hour capacity is of various EV models, and you'll see that some of them are 65 kilowatt hours, some of them are 85 kilowatt hours. There's a range depending on the vehicle type and size and battery makeup. But the size of the battery is not the only thing that determines how far you can go. The efficiency of the vehicle is the other piece of the puzzle. So basically, how many miles can that vehicle go on every kilowatt hour of electricity that's stored in the battery? And there's a wide range in efficiency, particularly now as there are more and more really big electric vehicles on the road. The bigger and heavier the vehicle, the less efficient it's going to be. So it's a combination of the size of the battery and the efficiency that will determine how far you can go. And the third factor is weather. Last week, we just had a whole webinar about winter driving, where we talked about how cold temperatures impact the range or the functioning of your battery and therefore the range. So that's another factor that determines how far you can go. But the big ones are the size of the battery and the efficiency. This webinar, though, is all about charging. So the next question is, how fast can you charge? And there are a couple of factors. The first is the power source, specifically how much power, how many kilowatt hours is available from that power source. So you can have a vehicle that has a super high powered onboard charger and can receive electricity at 350 kilowatts, but if you're only plugged into something that can deliver 150, that's what you're going to charge at. And we'll go over that in more detail with some examples shortly. The second thing that impacts how quickly you can charge is the onboard charger. So how quickly can the onboard charger built into the vehicle receive power from an external power source? Weather also impacts charging, though less than it impacts range. Basically, when it's colder, and by colder, I mean when it's very, very cold, you can see that charging slows a little bit, but for more on that, we'll refer you to the winter driving webinar that we just did last week. So with this, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Caroline to give us a 101 on the different levels of charging.
Yeah, as we move in to talk about charging, we'll start with level 1. Level 1 charging uses a regular household outlet. All EVs come with a cable that will plug into the outlet. Similar process as charging your smartphone. The port for this particular type of charging that we are talking about is pictured below on the left. You can see that this vehicle has a cable that is plugged into a standard outlet. Most EVs have a J1772 port for level 1 and level 2 charging. This is except for Tesla, which uses the North American Charging Standard. All manufacturers are in the process of adopting the NACS port, but for now we can know that the NACS port can be used for all 3 levels of charging, which we'll get into. For level 1, household outlets, if you're charging at home, don't deliver a lot of power. And so the charging speed is 4 miles of range per charging. Sometimes this varies between 2 or 6 miles per hour. This depends on several factors like how cold it is. 4 miles per hour is a good average. This may sound slow, but 4 miles of range per hour means that it would take 10 hours to, say, recharge overnight. If you drive 40 miles a day, this is actually the average driving distance for most Americans. So for most commutes to and from work, this is a this is plenty. This is a good mile of range. And while your car is charging, it's a fast process. Just take 10 seconds to plug in, and say you're charging at night, then you can go to sleep. And in the morning, your vehicle will be replenished with the miles that you need for the day. Um, so we'll move on to level 2. Okay. So level 2 charging is faster than level 1. Um, it makes driving an EV more convenient and more practical for those who drive longer distances. The level 2 charger uses the same ports as level 1. This is, again, there's an exception for Tesla with the NACS port, but we're seeing all major manufacturers and their EVs coming forward with the NACS port, hopefully in 2025. And then the other outlet for level 2 is the J1772 port, all right, for everything else. Say, if you drove 250 miles a day, you can recharge the whole car overnight by plugging into a level 2 station. That is because the range is around 11 to 54 miles of range per hour when using level 2. So we know that charging stations they're called electric vehicle supply equipment. This constitutes the cable and box, as you can see in the photo, that will connect your car to a 240-volt outlet. And this will manage the electric current running between the outlet and your vehicle. This prevents current from flowing if the charging port and cable aren't properly connected. So it's a safety mechanism. Level 2 is often installed at home, and level 2 charging stations can also be found at level 2 chargers can be found at public charging stations as well. Okay, now we have level 3 or DC fast charging. There was a standardization of the Tesla port. Now it is called the North American Charging Standard. This is used for all 3 levels of charging. So I'm saying there's been a standardization and an adoption. What that means is that for drivers of EVs from non-Tesla manufacturers, 20,000 Tesla supercharger ports are becoming available for these drivers. So it's really opening up the more accessibility to different chargers that are around. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So I mentioned that the North American Charging Standard port is becoming available. When I say all major manufacturers are adopting it, we're really talking about that. We've seen Ford, Rivian, General Motors. If you have a question about a manufacturer, they've probably adopted the NACS port. So the rollout has begun, and some manufacturers are making adapters for their existing vehicles. And there's been some delay with the supply chain, but we've still seen ports charging adapters become available for some drivers, and we expect that all new partner vehicles will have access to a NACS port on the vehicle or an adapter within 2025. If you're going to ask how fast a particular vehicle can charge in level 2, this graph really describes that. So on the left, we have the onboard charging capacity, and then in the middle, we will look at the medium level 2 charging speed because this ranges from vehicle to vehicle. And then on the right, we have different popular EV models. So if the onboard charging capacity is greater than 10 kilowatts, let's say the Chevy Blazer or the Hyundai Ioniq will reach 30 or more miles of range per hour. And then the maximum charging speed reduces a little bit as we see that some vehicles have a smaller onboard charger capacity. But in the last two rows, these are mostly plug-in hybrids. So we know that plug-in hybrids can also, well, can access level 1 and level 2 charging and have a small battery. And their range depends on the onboard charger capacity as well. And it can range from 11 to 22 miles range per hour. Yeah. Okay. So if we're going to recap and think about charging speed and what does onboard capacity mean, we can think about the fact that if a car can charge quickly, it can't draw more than what the station can give out. So this means if you were to plug a car with an onboard charger capacity of 7.2 kilowatts into a 6.6 kilowatt station, it would charge at 6.6 kilowatts. Okay. Yeah, we can have another example on the next slide. Okay, if we take the same car with the same onboard charger capacity of 7.2 kilowatts, and we plugged it into a station with 10 kilowatts per hour capacity, it would charge at 7.2 kilowatts. We know that automakers can improve this figure, but that adds different factors like the weight and complexity of the car. So it's important to remember that the car can't draw more power than what the station can give out. We've talked about charging at home. You can also charge on the go. We'll talk about that. Charging can be more convenient than gas. We know charging is different than gas, and part of making the switch to an EV is shifting your perspective because we are used to going to the gas station and refueling gas cars. But with an EV, you can take 10 seconds or like 2 minutes to plug in your EV and allow it to charge at night or while you're out. The median range for gas-powered vehicles is 412 miles, and EVs are almost there. We're seeing ranges coming close between 250 or 300 plus miles of range. If we look at an example, if you drive 40 miles a day, then you would have to refuel your gas car every 10 days. Probably you'll wait when you're close to empty. Sometimes you may take a detour to the gas station, and then this will add time to your commute while you're refueling your car. If you were to use a public charging station, you could charge your car somewhere you would stop anyway, like a grocery store or a gym. And this is exciting. Curbside charging is available in some cities, and Boston is in the process of getting their own side charging stations. Yeah. Okay. So you can also charge at home. Can charge at home with level 1 or level 2. And if you are deciding which is best for you, it really depends on how many miles you drive in a day. And we'll talk about installing a level 2 charging station the next few slides. So we have a couple of guidelines because the majority of EV drivers charge at home, right, either with a household outlet for level 1 or a level 2 charging station. If you would like to have some guidance, this guide really covers it all from determining your charging needs, how to pick a charging unit, and what exactly you would need an electrician for. We will be passing out these guidelines when we email you with the recording, and we'll pass the slides and the guidelines so that you may take a look. So we have a guideline, like I just talked about, for single family homes, but many folks live in apartment buildings or multi-unit dwellings. So we cover that as well in this guide. Okay, I'll briefly talk about fuel costs for EVs because we know that we've talked about how EVs are more efficient and sometimes cheaper than gas cars. So I'll briefly describe the process behind determining that it is cheaper to drive per mile on electricity than gas cars. So to begin, I made several assumptions. These are that on average, an EV uses 0.3 kilowatts of energy per mile. We'll assume that the average fuel efficiency of a gas car is 25.4 miles per gallon, and that the average price of gas is 3.23, so $3.23 per gallon. We can look at the different utilities on this graph. So we see that for National Grid territory, the cost per kilowatt hour is 34 cents. I'll just run through the process for this utility for the sake of time. But to calculate the cost per mile of electricity, we would multiply the total cost per kilowatt hour by the assumed efficiency of EVs per mile. So for National Grid, it's the same process for the other utilities. We would multiply the cost per kilowatt hour, 34 cents, by our assumed average of number of kilowatt hours that EVs use per mile. So 34 cents times 0.3 kilowatt hours. And then when we multiply those together, we find that the cost to drive per mile on electricity is 10 cents. We can then calculate really quickly the cost to drive per mile on gas. So we would divide the average gas price, $3.23, based on our assumption, by the assumed fuel efficiency of gas cars, and this is 25.4 miles per gallon. So we'll find that gas cars drivers pay per mile around 12 cents. And then quickly to reach our savings, we can subtract the cost per mile on gas by the cost per mile on electricity. And this is around 2 or 3 cents, depending on your utility. If you are interested in the reasoning and math behind this scenario, we will link to our reasoning behind our math in our slides when you receive them. I'll pass it off to Anna.
Thank you, Caroline. So part of the reason why we link to our math is obviously we'd like to share our math, but we also at this point have a situation where what you pay for electricity might be different from what you saw on the previous slide, even if you're served by National Grid, Eversource, or Rhode Island Energy. And the reason for that is twofold. So, well, actually threefold. Some of you who are on this call might be served by a municipal light plant instead of one of our investor-owned utilities. Some of you might have your electricity delivered by one of the investor-owned utilities, but may have signed up with a competitive electricity supplier. And some of you, and an increasing number of you, may live in communities that are served by aggregation programs where your municipality goes out and procures electricity supply on your behalf. So we wanted to take a moment to just explain how to do this math for yourself if you'd like, looking at your electric bill. So we're just going to go through what all these line items are briefly to figure out how to do the math for yourself. So a couple things to notice on this sample bill. First, there's a fixed customer charge. So this is just a charge that you pay every month that is independent of how many kilowatt hours of electricity you consume. For this case, it's $10. It might be different for you depending on what electric utility you have, but because that is a fixed charge that's independent of how much electricity you use, we're kind of going to ignore it for this analysis. The second thing to notice is that the supplier on this bill is not Eversource, even though it's an Eversource electric bill. It's an aggregation program. So full disclosure, this is my electric bill from a couple of years ago. And I'm enrolled in the Cambridge Community Electricity Program. So I'm not on the basic service rate that we use to calculate all the math that Caroline just went over. I have a different rate. So that rate is here. So my generation service charge through that program is 13.669 cents per kilowatt hour. And this is different from what I would be paying if I were on the basic service rate with Eversource or had independently signed up with a competitive electricity supplier, which we do not recommend. But that only makes up half of what I pay per kilowatt hour because then there's also all these other charges. We're not going to go through them all one by one, but they all together are your delivery charges. And for me at that time, it added up to 14.622 cents per kilowatt hour. So if I want to figure out what I'm paying per kilowatt hour, I would add those generation charges to the delivery charges. And when I do that, that comes out to 28.91 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see that that's lower than the 32 or 31 or 34 cents we just talked about. So an EV charged in this household would see even greater savings per mile compared to the math we just did because the electricity costs are lower. So if you haven't recently actually looked at your electricity bill, definitely worth doing that so you can understand exactly what you're paying. And if you want to do the math, you can use that figure. A different way of looking at this is just going with an example with a particular car and saying, okay, what are you going to pay for 100 miles of driving? So for this example, we took the Chevy Equinox EV, which is one of the most affordable electric vehicles out there right now. Its starting MSRP is well under the average price of a new vehicle of any type in the country, and it also qualifies for the federal tax credit and the state rebates in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So it's a very popular vehicle. It has a battery that is 85 kilowatt hours of capacity, and it gets 319 miles per charge. So if we're assuming we're driving this vehicle and we're driving 100 miles, how much is it going to cost? In National Grid territory, it'll cost you about $9. In Eversource territory, it'll cost you about $8.50. And in Rhode Island Energy's territory, it'll cost you $8.26. If I were to charge that vehicle on the rates that I just had on the previous slide, it would be even lower than that, but you can get a sense of, okay, 100 miles, somewhere between $8 and $9. If we take a relatively efficient gas car, so one that gets 30 miles per gallon, and use current gas prices, which for New England right now average to be $3.14, according to the Energy Information Administration. Driving a gas-powered car 100 miles at 30 miles per gallon would cost about $10.60. So you can see that those savings per mile add up when you start thinking about 100 miles at a time. With that, I will turn it back over to Caroline to talk about how to find public charging and how to navigate all those systems.
Yeah, there's a lot of public level 2 charging stations available, especially in New England and in Massachusetts. Having a charger at home isn't always the most convenient for some drivers, especially for renters. So it's really great to know the different tools that will help you locate a level 2 charger. PlugShare is one of those tools, and it is an app and website. This screenshot on the slide showcases the number of level 2 chargers in operation across Massachusetts. So PlugShare is open sourced, which means it will also filter and show you non-network chargers because a lot of chargers are networked. We'll cover costs in the next slide because they vary, but it's good to know that on PlugShare, you can filter what you're looking for with factors that include whether the charging station is near an amenity like a bathroom or like a shopping center. You can filter what level of charging is available at the station. Maybe, and I think also filter on cost. So it's a good way to find chargers because often if you say you use like Google or Apple Maps, EV chargers are often filtered out. Okay. So I mentioned that a lot of public chargers are networked. Um, this means that these companies, these networking apps that we see on the screen, are in charge of those charging stations. ChargePoint is a big one, and we see a majority ChargePoint chargers in New England. Um, and a lot of charging stations are really smartphone heavy and considered like smart stations because they will be connected to an app sometimes, which will enable you to monitor your charging in real time. It'll give you a real-time estimation of costs. You're also able to get notification when charging. There are also non-network stations that mean not connected to your smartphone, may not require you to have an app. Um, and because they're not part of a system, sometimes they can be harder to locate. I mentioned that PlugShare is open source, so people can in real time can report where a non-network charging station is located. And to briefly speak about costs, it's hard to give an estimation because some stations charge by the kilowatt hours that go into your car, and others charge by the time you spend parked next to the charger, um, like a normal parking space. So sometimes charging is free. It varies. And one last thing I'll mention is that with ChargePoint, you can actually have a membership. A lot of times, this is really convenient um, to find for finding charging. There are also some other great sources, like a Better Route Planner, which we can talk about if you have any questions about that. I'll pass it back on to Anna. Thank you.
So, as Caroline mentioned, there are lots of different charging network companies. So it can be a little intimidating if you're new to the space, how to figure out which apps you need to download, which networks to be part of. And so we wanted to sort of illustrate how you might go about doing this. So say you are planning a trip to Providence to go see the Roger Williams Park Zoo, and you want to figure out, okay, can I charge along the way? What does that look like? So what we would recommend is that step one is you go to PlugShare. And on PlugShare, you can type in the address and see what charging stations are nearby. So that is the middle screenshot on the screen. It'll show you, okay, at Roger Williams Park Zoo, there's a J1772 ChargePoint charging station. It tells you the exact address. It tells you that there's a park and restrooms and dining nearby. It tells you that the parking lot is available 24/7. It tells you exactly where they are, that they're just to the left of the main entrance. And if you were to scroll down on the actual app or website, you could see photos or people who have recently checked in or used the charging station to tell you if it's working or how fast it charged and things like that. So that can give you some of the basic information. It'll also tell you what the costs are. But then if you want to get a little bit more detail, like exactly what power level are these charging stations at? How do I pay? You can see, okay, on PlugShare, it'll tell you this is a ChargePoint station. So then you can open up the ChargePoint app and get a little bit more information. The apps from the actual charging network operators may tell you if somebody's currently charging or how many of the stations are currently available. And on some, not many, but some charging station locations, the apps may allow you to reserve a spot in the future. That's something that's kind of new in this space. We'll see if it really kicks in and takes off. But most drivers, I think, will then end up using the ChargePoint app or the Electrify America app or whatever it is to look up more information about that station. The other thing to note is that a lot of the paying for the charging stations goes through these apps, and a lot of them are interoperable. So you may pull up to a charging station that is branded with one of these charging networks, but you may very well be able to pay for it and find it on the app of the charging network that you use more frequently, because all the manufacturers or these networks understand that if the stations are interoperable, if you can use one, even if you're a member of a different network, that benefits the industry as a whole. So what I think most new drivers do is start with PlugShare, depending on where you're going, see what charging stations are there. You'll get a feel for which apps you want to download and then which ones you use the most frequently. And then if you go somewhere new, you can see, okay, based on the apps I currently use, am I good? Do I need to download anything new? But a lot of work is being done on the back end to make all of these more interoperable. Okay, so that was sort of our general discussion about public charging and at-home charging. Now we're going to talk specifically about fast charging because we get a lot of questions about fast charging. So this has its own section today. So earlier, on one of the very first slides, we had a graphic that shows how AC charging or level 1 or level 2 charging works. And that's where on this graphic, it's blue. You get electricity from a level 1 or level 2 outlet in alternating current. It goes to the onboard charger, which translates it into DC current, which puts it directly into the battery, the lithium-ion battery, and that's managed by the BMS, or the battery management software. With DC fast charging, what's happening instead is the vehicle is receiving electricity in direct current, and that allows you to bypass that whole onboard charger situation and allows you to charge the battery up directly and much faster. So in this graphic, it's a 50 kilowatt DC fast charger. We'll see that there's a wide range in how quickly DC chargers can charge your vehicle. But that, first of all, is the distinction. That's why level 3 charging is known as DC fast charging. It's because it's direct current. Caroline already alluded to this a little bit earlier or explained it a little bit earlier, but right now we're in a unique time in the world of DC fast charging, and that up until this point, the market has been split into a couple different standards. So historically, European and American manufacturers have used the J1772 combo for DC fast charging. Asian manufacturers have used the CHAdeMO plug, which you can see is just physically very different from this J1772. And Tesla has used its own proprietary charging system. Now the market is all moving towards this North American Charging Standard, or NACS, which again is the plug on the bottom right. It's based on the Tesla charging network, but now it's open to other manufacturers. It's one plug that can do level 1, level 2, and level 3 charging, or one port, I should say, that can do all three. And it is being rolled out this year and next year. So some manufacturers have already made those adapters available. Others are going to be making the adapters available soon. And supposedly with model year 2025, we will start seeing those NACS chargers built right into non-Tesla vehicles as well. So we're in a weird spot right now where we've got a couple different things going on, but moving forward, it's all going to be standardized to one plug type. With DC fast charging, first question we get is, okay, how fast can I actually charge? And I wish that there were a very easy answer, but unfortunately it really depends, and it depends on a couple different factors. So as we've talked about before, one of the primary factors is, what is the station power? Like, is that DC fast charger delivering direct current at 50 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts, 350 kilowatts? That is a big factor in how fast you can charge. And similarly, how quickly the vehicle can receive that electricity is also a factor. We talked about that earlier. With DC fast charging, there's some other things that matter too, and one of them is the state of charge. So a vehicle that is only 10% full, so to speak, will charge faster than a vehicle that is 90% full. And we'll go over that in a moment about how the speed of DC fast charging changes with the state of charge. The total battery capacity also matters. So it'll take you longer to fill up a bigger battery than it would take you to fill up a smaller battery. The temperature matters. As we mentioned before, if it's very, very cold, it takes a little bit longer to charge because first the vehicle has to warm the battery up to the right temperature, and that takes some energy. And then the vehicle efficiency is more a matter of how far you can go, but can also speak to how quickly you can receive that electricity. On the right, we have a very generalized, and I really need to stress that it is a generalized table about how fast you can charge at different levels. So fast charging is really DC fast charging, and you can have a DC fast charger that delivers 25 kilowatts. There's some that are even lower than that, all the way up to 350 kilowatts. And there's even some talk about making even higher power chargers, particularly for medium and heavy duty vehicles. But for passenger vehicles, it's largely somewhere between 50 and 350. And here are some very loose estimates where you can see, okay, at 50 kilowatts, you can expect maybe 90 miles in half an hour. At 100, you might expect 166 miles in half an hour. And at 150, you can do 200 miles in half an hour. But the state of charge of your battery and the particular vehicle that you drive will really impact those figures. So here's an example of what I mean. So here are just a couple of vehicles. This is illustrative, that where we've pulled out, okay, what is the maximum power that that vehicle can receive per the manufacturer's information? And then what does the manufacturer publish on their website in terms of how fast you can charge? And you can see that the manufacturers don't even have a consistent way of displaying this information. So we have here a couple of all-electric vehicles, the Nissan Leaf, the Nissan Leaf Plus, the Kia Niro electric vehicle, and the Hyundai Ioniq 5. And the range for those vehicles is anywhere between 150 and 303 miles per charge. The Leaf has a max power of 50 kilowatts. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 has a max of 350 kilowatts. And the manufacturers have some information on their website of how long does it take to get from zero, so a completely empty battery, to a battery that is 80% full, assuming you are charging at the maximum power available to that vehicle. So for a Nissan Leaf, you might need 40 minutes to get 120 miles, but for a Hyundai Ioniq 5, you might only need 18 minutes to get 242 miles. So that shows you a little bit the range of vehicles. On our EV Finder, we share for every vehicle that's available what that max power draw is. So if it's very important to you to be able to charge very fast, you can sort and filter and look at just vehicles that have that really high kilowatt capacity for their DC fast charging. But there is a wide range in different vehicle models. So it's important, if this is important to you, to make sure you look at that particular spec when you're comparing different vehicle models. I mentioned that the state of charge will impact how quickly you can charge your vehicle. And to sort of illustrate that, we have a sample charging session of a Chevy Bolt, which is a very popular electric vehicle that's not currently being made, but will be made again soon. And so we have a sample charging session here where the vehicle is plugged in at a DC fast charger when it is 5% full. So the state of charge, or the total sort of charge level of that battery, is very low. It's at 5%. In the first 30 minutes, when the battery is the most empty, you will charge the fastest. If we go back to that the bathtub metaphor, you can think of when the bathtub is very empty, you can have that faucet at full throttle and not worry about overflowing. But as you get closer and closer to the bathtub being full, you might slow down how fast you're adding water just to make sure that you don't overflow. That's kind of a metaphor for what's happening here, except this is very complicated battery chemistry that is beyond me. But in that first 30 minutes of charging, you might add 98 miles on this Chevy Bolt. And then you're at 43% full. And at that point, the battery management software will go, okay, we're closer to full, let's slow down a little bit. And so the next 30 minutes, you might only add 90 miles because the vehicle's battery management software system is going to say, okay, we got to throttle, we got to slow down just a little bit, just to be careful. And then when you get to 80% capacity, that's really the point where charging really slows down. So even though this Chevy Bolt can draw energy at 50 kilowatts, at around 80% capacity, it's going to say, nope, we're not doing 50 kilowatts. We're going to slow down to 25. And the main reason for that is that to protect the long-term health of the battery, you want to reduce heat. And if you're charging still at 50 kilowatts when the battery is that close to full, the battery is going to get hot, and that's just not a thing that we want to have happen. So the battery management system is very sophisticated and will sort of throttle charging when you get closer to full. So where you might see 98 and 90 miles in the first 2 sets of half hours, in that last hour, you might only add 51 miles of charge because you've slowed down. What does this mean for you as a driver? If you're going on a road trip, it might make sense to stop more frequently for smaller periods of time than to run your battery all the way down to 0 and then sit at a DC fast charging station until you're all the way up to 100% again. The good news is that many of these vehicles will calculate for you the best charging plan right in the vehicle. So a lot of the Teslas, for example, if you put in a destination in the vehicle, it will say, okay, stop at this supercharger for exactly 18 minutes, stop at this one for 9 minutes, and they will map out the most efficient route for you. For vehicles that don't have that capability, there's a really excellent app and website that Caroline mentioned earlier called A Better Route Planner, which basically does the same math for you depending on which vehicle you drive. So big takeaway here is charging will slow dramatically after 80%, and the state of charge really matters for the speed. At this point, we get a lot of questions about, okay, so DC fast charging, where is it? How is it being built out? So this is a graphic or a screenshot again from PlugShare. I'll stress that PlugShare is one of those websites where the more you zoom in, the more charging stations sort of pop up. So there are a couple places on this map that look a little sparse, but there's more and more charging being built all the time. You may have heard of the NEVI program. This is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that came out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in 2022. This does two things. Well, the main thing it does is it hands funding to every state in the nation that wants to accept it to build out DC fast charging stations every 50 miles on major travel corridors, so that if you want to drive from here to California, every 50 miles on major highways, there will be at least 4 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers available to you. The amount of funding per state is calculated by some complicated formula. Massachusetts received $63.5 million. Rhode Island received $23 million. And all the states are in various levels of actually building out this charging. So Rhode Island is already done. They completed their phase 1. There's not a lot of major interstate highways in Rhode Island, so they did a couple installs and they're done. Massachusetts is working on building out those stations now, and the first ones are expected to come online in the spring. In Massachusetts, there's also funding available for DC fast charging stations through programs by the utilities. If you've been to one of our webinars about incentives, you might have heard about these make-ready incentives. There's $400 million total for charging in that pot. A subset of that has been for DC fast charging. The public DC fast charging funding is already used up, but there's still funding for DC fast charging for fleets or other entities. I know we're already coming up on 1 o'clock, so I'll just very briefly mention that when you charge matters. We just had a webinar last week about a new electric vehicle demand response program in Rhode Island. But the long and short of this is that if you've heard of peak hours or peak days, there are moments in our electricity usage when electricity usage is really, really high. And those moments throughout the year are the most expensive and the most polluting. So it's very important to not exacerbate those peaks by charging our EVs, but instead spread that demand out so that we don't have these really high peaks as much. And there are different types of programs that utilities can and do offer to incentivize EV drivers to not charge on peak. So right now, if you are a National Grid customer, there's an off-peak charging rebate available to you. And if you're a Rhode Island Energy customer, you can enroll in the demand response program. We can send more information out about that if you're interested. We just didn't have time to go through it all in detail today. But very quick note, it matters when you charge. We'll turn to questions. I know we only have a couple minutes, so let's see what we got. I know there's a lot in the chat here. Okay. I am just going to go in the order that the questions came in because there's too many for me to scan. So first question is, what is the proper etiquette when you charge at different public level 3 chargers when the EV has an onboard charger that maxes out at 50 kilowatts? I think what this question is saying is, should you change how you charge if you're charging with a vehicle that has a lower, for example, if you've got a vehicle that can only charge at 50 kilowatts, but the charging station is 350 kilowatts, I don't think that this is a question of etiquette yet. I think the main, when you think about public charging and etiquette, the most important thing is move your vehicle when you're done charging. I don't think anybody is going to worry about if you're charging at a 350 kilowatt charger, but you can only take 50 kilowatts. That's too much for people to pay attention to. But if you're done, definitely move your vehicle so that somebody else can use that charger. Then we have a question that says, okay, I'm summarizing a bit. I pay less than what you had on your math per gallon for gas, and my vehicle is very efficient. Does that mean I shouldn't get an electric vehicle? This is obviously a personal question. What I want to stress, though, is that this webinar was all about charging, so we only talked about the benefits, or the cost benefits of electric vehicles when it comes to fuel costs, but there are really significant benefits to electric vehicles on maintenance and operation costs as well. So when we talk about that in our webinars, we usually cite a consumer report study that says over the life of a vehicle, you can expect about half the maintenance and repair costs in an electric car compared to an equivalent gas-powered car. And for most people, that ends up being somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000 over the life of the vehicle. So that's something to factor in with your personal situation as well. The other thing to stress is that gas prices historically are volatile. So right now, you might be getting a good price per gallon, but 6 months from now, all bets are off. Electricity prices historically have been more stable, with the big exception of that jump that we saw after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Natural gas prices really jumped, and that impacted our electricity prices. But beyond that aberration, basically, electricity prices have been much more stable. And when electricity prices change, there's a whole process where the Department of Public Utilities or the Public Utilities Commission has to approve any of those changes, which is not true. There's no public entity approving changes in gas prices. So right now, the math might pencil out one way, but it's important to think about that volatility in the long term as well. Let's see. There's a lot of questions, so I'm trying to figure out which ones. Okay. There's one question about, do we know of a source comparing and reviewing chargers to assist in the decision? And I would point you to the same sorts of entities that review lots of other technology. So Consumer Reports, Wirecutter, they all have reviews of different charging stations. The main thing when you're looking at charging stations is if you are in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, you should check whether there is an incentive program with your particular utility or your state. That is true depending on where exactly you live. There's different resources. We've got a link that explains that, but often those programs have a list of approved chargers. So step one is do that. Step 2 is always make sure that the charging station you are purchasing is UL listed. That is the Underwriters Laboratory. Some people are selling level 2 chargers mostly online that are not UL tested, and that just means they haven't gone through the rigorous safety testing that you really want your technology to have gone through. So always make sure you're getting a UL listed charger. Okay. I will answer one more question, and then I'm so sorry, there's a lot of questions that we're just not going to get to, but please, we will respond to you individually when we go through the questions later. But if you had a question that we didn't get to, feel free to email us. The last question is about time of use rates. It seems like it's a patchwork. What's going on there? The long and short answer, or the short answer to that is yes, it is a patchwork. The different utilities have different programs. There is no coherent state strategy. And this is something we've talked a lot about on the advocacy side of things, and happy to connect to talk more about that. But in recognition of the fact that it's 1 o'clock, I will just share this slide, which I'm kind of contractually obliged to do, which is we're a nonprofit. We very much want to keep putting on webinars like this for free to people across Massachusetts and Rhode Island. If you are so inclined and able, we would be very grateful for a donation. Our link for that is greenenergyconsumers.org/donate. And if you'd like to engage with us in other ways, we've got lots of different ways for you to do this, either on social media. We've got a Drive Green community Facebook group where you can talk to real-life EV drivers and ask them about their charging. We've got a newsletter, we've got a pledge, we've got lots of things. But because it's already 1 o'clock, I will say we will send you all those links in a follow-up email. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Have you ever thought about how your house affects the planet? As Thoreau said, what's the use of a house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? This is the story of transforming my house and making a difference. We now pay 0 energy bills, we produce more energy than we consume, and we're doing our part to help the planet. I'm a single dad with 2 amazing daughters, and I've been thinking a lot about what kind of world we're leaving to our children, and my personal responsibility for that world. You've probably heard all the bad news about the climate crisis, melting polar ice caps, rising ocean levels, and bizarre weather. It seems pretty overwhelming sometimes, and maybe that makes you want to tune it out, even though you know it's real. But then there are those moments when you really wish there was something you could do about it. And then you think, what can I do to make a positive difference? That's the question I asked myself a few years ago, and here's what I came up with. I did a bunch of research and learned that our carbon footprint, the amount of carbon pollution a family produces, is the direct result of the food we eat, the stuff we buy, our transportation, and the energy efficiency of our home. Of these 4 things, improving our home was the most important change we could make to reduce our family's carbon footprint. So I decided I wanted to take our house, a wasteful energy consumer, and turn it into an energy producer. But how? I did some more research and found that it's possible to renovate a home so that it produces more renewable energy than it uses. It's called net positive energy, and it means rethinking the status quo. All this new information and awareness was making my head hurt. It felt like I was waking up for the first time to the reality that I actually had to do something. And then I discovered something really incredible. When I started doing something to help, I actually felt better. As I aligned my actions with my values, the feeling of being overwhelmed flipped into a feeling of strength and empowerment. So let me tell you how we did it. The first thing was to bring together a small project team. Caleb the carpenter, Bill the construction guy, and Mark the energy engineer. Mark and I began by pulling out some paper and starting to sketch. Quickly, the 10 key elements that needed to come together became clear. Roof and plumbing extensions, wall insulation, attic insulation and air sealing, basement insulation, high-performance windows, ventilation, better appliances, better lighting, solar electricity, and solar hot water. Not only were we going to renovate the house, we were turning it into a laboratory for eliminating our home's carbon footprint and increasing our sustainability. We were going to lower our costs and demonstrate how we could live in a way that felt true to our values. We started with some diagnostic testing to see where our house was consuming the most energy. An infrared scan a way to make invisible energy use more visible, showed us the areas where we needed a lot more insulation. And a blower door test showed us where the big air leaks were. Insulation is like the layers of clothing we wear outside in the wintertime. Air sealing is like putting on a windbreaker over those layers to keep the cold air out. Both are important for optimal comfort. We designed a system that would allow us to install spray foam insulation directly on the outside walls of the house. We called it outsolation. First, we did two things to prepare. We extended out the gable ends of the roof to create an overhang and extended the piping for the water spigots and the gas meter. Then we built wall trusses and attached them directly over the existing siding. Once the trusses were in place, our insulator sprayed closed-cell foam on the outside walls of the house. Insulation performance is measured in R value. The higher the R value, the better the insulation and comfort. The spray foam more than tripled the R value of our walls, from a typical R13 wall to R43. Then it was on to the attic and the basement. In the attic, we air sealed all the gaps that the blower door test had shown us to keep the warm air in our house from leaking up into the attic, which had been causing ice dams, increased energy bills, and seriously reducing our comfort. Then we installed a radiant barrier in the attic to keep our house cooler in the summer. And finally, we blew in a bunch of cellulose made from recycled newspaper to bring the insulation value up to R76. In the basement, we used a simple system to insulate the concrete floor and foundation walls, moisture-blocking paint, a wood frame, and foam board. Then we simply created a new floor with painted plywood and new walls with sheetrock, and presto, a finished, comfortable space. Windows are invariably the weak link in any wall system. Our original windows were miserable, leaky, single pane with old storm windows that whistled on a windy winter day. We replaced them with triple pane, high-performance windows. The difference in comfort and energy performance is phenomenal. We've never experienced such high levels of comfort in any house before, ever. Warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer. The dramatically improved insulation levels mean that our home's interior surfaces are actually warmer in the winter, so we lose a lot less of our radiant energy to them. The conventional thinking is to stop insulating here. But if you go here, you get into a whole new zone of amazing comfort and almost non-existent energy bills. We also learned that with a very well insulated and draft-free house, it's really important to provide fresh air to the people living there. The myth for years had been to let the house breathe. But houses don't know how to breathe. They let in outside air not based on what people need, but on the outside temperature, wind conditions, and the amount and location of the air leaks around the house. The best idea is to build tight and ventilate right. We provided assured air quality for the house by simply upgrading our bath ventilation to a high-performance fan with a 24-hour timer. Now we all breathe fresher air, and it's easy to keep good relative humidity levels. And we get fewer colds and viruses. We're all healthier. Next, we did a bit of soul searching to look at ourselves and our behavior to see if there were any changes we could make to reduce our carbon pollution, to live more sustainably. We used a meter to go around the house and measure the electricity use of our appliances. We discovered that our clothes dryer used 6,000 watts, the equivalent of 600 10-watt light bulbs, so we unplugged it and gave it away. Hanging up our clothes on drying racks took a little while to get used to. It seemed like a hassle at first. Now it's just second nature. All of our other appliances are ENERGY STAR rated for high performance. Then we switched out all of our old incandescent light bulbs to new high-performance LED bulbs. We discovered that every energy-using product has two price tags, the purchase cost and the larger cost to power the product over its lifetime. LED bulbs are actually smarter and a lot cheaper than incandescents or compact fluorescents because they use a lot less energy and they last for many years. And finally, after cutting our energy use by more than half, we added the tools to allow us to produce our own clean energy, solar electric and solar hot water panels. The solar electric system provides almost twice the amount of electricity that our home uses. There's a rolling credit on our monthly account and we'll never pay another electric bill. The ground-mounted solar hot water system provides almost 70% of our annual hot water needs. And our ultra-low flow shower head means we could theoretically take a 2-hour shower on 1 tank of solar hot water. As I was doing all this, I started to think about you. I thought about how I wanted to share this information to help you take control of your home's carbon footprint. So I started to take notes and snap a bunch of photos of our project so I could make this video for you. I wanted to show you what's possible. We ended up turning our home into a positive energy producer on a modest budget, and it wasn't that hard. In addition to the dramatic energy savings, we zeroed out our home's carbon footprint, improved our quality of life, and became the first renovated home in Massachusetts to produce more energy than we consume. And look at all of these other benefits that we get to enjoy. It's a win-win-win for our family, for the economy, and for the planet. Our project was a lesson in being bold, in not being afraid to try new things. And it's time for each of us to be bold and to take action now to address the climate crisis. Because frankly, we don't have a lot of time. So, use a carbon footprint calculator to measure your carbon pollution, and then do whatever you can to reduce it. Even if you can't do a full energy renovation on your house, do one or more of the 10 things we did, or do something completely different to reduce your carbon footprint. There are so many examples of great things that people are doing to be more sustainable, like Colin Beavan, who started the No Impact Man project to raise awareness about the benefits of personal carbon reductions, Marshall Saunders, who started the Citizens Climate Lobby to empower people to advocate for national policies to address climate change, and Annie Leonard, who created The Story of Stuff to motivate people to rethink their purchasing choices and build a healthier planet. And these are just a few examples. People just like you are doing extraordinary and inspiring things all around the world, and together are making big positive changes. You can be part of this, and you can make a difference. There are so many ways. Check it out. So, envision the future you want, and then get out there and do something to help make it happen. I look forward to seeing you on the path to a healthy and sustainable future.